Emily Carter had spent 3 years building a life she was proud of. She was 31 years old, a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm in Denver, and for the first time in her adult life, she had savings that meant something. $42,000, to be exact, sitting quietly in a joint account she shared with her fiancé, Jason Reed. Every dollar of it had been earned the hard way: double shifts at her first job out of college, freelance writing gigs on weekends, 3 years of skipped vacations, secondhand furniture, and refusing to buy a new car when her old one started making that awful clunking sound. It wasn't just money. It was a promise she'd made to herself when she was 22 and broke, eating ramen in a studio apartment with a broken heater. Someday, I'll have enough that no one can take it from me. She should have known better than to believe that. The Carter family reunion happened every June at Emily's mother's house in a quiet suburb outside Colorado Springs. It was tradition, a weekend of barbecues, old photo albums, and Aunt Linda's potato salad that nobody actually liked, but everyone pretended to. Emily had been looking forward to this one more than most, because she planned to announce her wedding date. She and Jason had been engaged for 8 months, and they'd finally settled on a date in October at a small vineyard 2 hours outside the city. It wasn't going to be extravagant, but it was going to be theirs, paid for with their own money, exactly the way Emily wanted it. Her mother, Diane Carter, had never quite approved of how independent Emily had become. Diane had a way of speaking about money that made Emily's skin crawl, as if every dollar Emily earned was somehow still, in some cosmic sense, the family's collective property. "We're a family," Diane liked to say. "What's yours is ours." Emily's younger brother, Tyler, was 34 and had never held a job for longer than 8 months. He had cycled through failed business ventures, a food truck that lasted a summer, a consulting company that consisted of him, and a LinkedIn profile, and most recently, a cryptocurrency scheme that had already lost him $15,000 that wasn't his to lose. Diane had bailed him out more times than Emily could count, but this time was different. This time, Tyler had gotten into serious debt with people who weren't interested in payment plans. At the reunion, Emily noticed the tension the moment she walked in. Tyler wouldn't make eye contact. Diane kept glancing between her children like she was rehearsing something in her head. Emily should have paid closer attention to that look. Instead, she spent the weekend catching up with cousins, helping set up chairs for the group photo, and laughing with Jason as her uncle told the same fishing story he told every single year. It was a good weekend. That was what made what came next so devastating. 3 days after the reunion, Emily opened her banking app to transfer the vineyard deposit. The screen loaded, and for a moment she thought her phone had glitched. Balance: $214.53. She refreshed it again, called the bank in a panic, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone to her ear. The representative on the line, a woman named Karen with a calm, practiced customer service voice, explained that a series of transfers had been made over the reunion weekend, 6 transactions, all initiated from a linked account, all authorized with Emily's own login credentials. "That's impossible," Emily said. "I never authorized that. I don't even know how someone would have access to." And then it hit her. 2 years ago, in a moment of family harmony she now deeply regretted, Emily had added her mother as an authorized user on one of her accounts, a leftover arrangement from when Diane had helped her set up her very first checking account at 18. Emily had forgotten it even existed. She'd never removed the access because it had never once occurred to her that her own mother would use it against her. She called her mother immediately, her voice cracking before Diane even picked up. "Mom, where's my money?" There was a pause. Then, in a tone so casual it made Emily's blood run cold, Diane said, "Your brother needed it more." Emily sat down on her kitchen floor, phone pressed to her ear, and listened to her mother explain, without a trace of shame, that Tyler owed money to people who had threatened him. That the family couldn't just let something happen to him. That Emily was in a good place and could always earn more, but Tyler had nothing. That this was what family was for. "You stole my wedding fund," Emily said, her voice flat with disbelief. "You took $42,000 out of my account without asking me." I didn't steal anything, Diane snapped, suddenly defensive. I have access to that account. I used it to help your brother. You'll thank me one day when you realize family matters more than some party at a vineyard. It's not a party, Mom. It's my wedding. You can have a nice wedding without spending a fortune on it. People used to get married in backyards. Emily hung up. She sat on the cold tile floor of her kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something inside her go very quiet and very still. It wasn't the loud, sobbing grief she expected. It was colder than that. Sharper. When Jason came home that evening and found her still sitting there, she looked up at him and said only one sentence: "I need a lawyer and I need to know exactly what's legal." The next morning, Emily didn't cry. She made a list. She called the bank back and formally disputed the transfers, providing a written statement that she had not authorized them. She requested the exact timestamps, the exact destination accounts, and copies of every transaction record. The bank's fraud department opened an investigation. Technically, this qualified as unauthorized use, even with an authorized user designation, because the transfers had been made without Emily's knowledge or consent for personal, non-household purposes. And Diane was not a joint account owner, only an authorized user with limited privileges that didn't extend to large discretionary transfers. She found an attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Gwynn, who specialized in financial fraud between family members, a more common practice area than Emily would have guessed. Patricia listened to the whole story without interrupting, then said, "This happens more than people think. And I want you to understand something right now. Your mother committed a crime. Whether you choose to pursue it as one is up to you, but don't let anyone in your family convince you that what happened was normal or that you're overreacting." Those words settled something in Emily's chest. Patricia helped her draft a formal demand letter to Diane, requesting full repayment within 30 days, with a clear notice that failure to comply would result in a civil suit for conversion, the legal term for the wrongful taking of someone else's property, as well as a police report for financial exploitation. Emily hesitated over that last part. Some small, exhausted piece of her still wanted to protect her mother from consequences, the way she'd been trained to do her whole life. Patricia noticed the hesitation. "You don't have to decide today," Patricia said gently. "But I want you to sit with this question. If a stranger had done this to you, would you hesitate?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. A week later, Tyler showed up at Emily's apartment unannounced. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same hoodie he'd probably slept in for days. "I didn't ask her to do it," he said, before Emily had even fully opened the door. "I swear, I told her not to touch your account. She does this. She decides what's best and then she just does it." Emily crossed her arms and let him stand on the porch. "You took the money, Tyler. Whether you asked for it or not, you knew where it came from. Did you say no? Did you give it back?" Silence. "That's what I thought." "I'm going to pay you back," he said. "I promise. I just need time." "You've been promising Mom that for 6 years," Emily said. "I'm not Mom. I'm not going to keep bailing you out and calling it love." She almost let him in. The old habit, the invisible leash of being the responsible older sister, tugged at her hard. But she thought about the vineyard, about the dress she'd already tried on twice, about Jason's face when she told him their wedding might have to be postponed indefinitely, and she found the strength to simply say, "Get a lawyer of your own, Tyler. Because I'm not stopping this." She closed the door. Word spread through the family fast, the way it always does. Aunt Linda called to say Emily was tearing the family apart. Her cousin Rachel texted a long paragraph about how money isn't everything, a sentence that struck Emily as almost comically easy to say when it wasn't your money. Her uncle, oddly, was the only one who called just to ask if she was okay, and she found herself crying for the first time since the whole ordeal began, simply because someone had asked the right question. Diane, for her part, refused to respond to the demand letter for 2 full weeks. When she finally did call, it wasn't an apology. It was an ultimatum. "If you go through with this, Emily, don't expect me at your wedding. Don't expect me in your life at all. I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you treat your own mother, with lawyers and police reports. Emily had rehearsed this moment in her head more times than she could count, imagining she'd feel devastated, that the threat of losing her mother would break her resolve the way it always had before. Instead, she felt something close to relief. "You didn't give me everything, Mom," she said quietly. "I earned what I have. You took it. And if loving you means letting you steal from me every time Tyler messes up his life, then I don't know if I can afford that kind of love anymore." She hung up before Diane could respond, and for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. Between the demand letter and the lawsuit, there was a strange, suspended period Emily hadn't expected, weeks where nothing seemed to move, and yet everything inside her kept shifting. She went to work every day and smiled at coworkers and answered emails about ad campaigns as though her personal life hadn't quietly caved in. At night, she sat with Jason at the kitchen table going over bank statements Patricia had requested, highlighting dates, cross-referencing the reunion weekend against the 6 transfers, building a timeline so airtight that even a stranger reading it cold would understand exactly what had happened. It was during this period that Emily started noticing patterns she'd spent her whole life overlooking. She found an old text thread with her mother from 4 years earlier, when Tyler had needed help with a security deposit, an amount Emily had transferred herself, cheerfully, without a second thought. She found another from 2 years ago, a loan for Tyler's food truck that Emily had co-signed on, one Diane had promised would be paid back within 6 months. It never was. Reading those old messages side by side with the current disaster, Emily realized this wasn't a single betrayal. It was a lifelong pattern she had simply never been forced to name out loud before. She brought the pattern to her first session with a therapist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Alvarez who specialized in family financial dynamics, a subspecialty Emily hadn't even known existed until Patricia recommended him. "You were cast as the responsible one very early," Dr. Alvarez told her, after she'd laid out the family history in halting, embarrassed fragments. "Responsible people get relied on. And relied upon people often don't get asked, they get assumed. Your mother didn't think she needed your permission because, in her mind, you'd never really had the right to refuse in the first place." Emily sat with that for a long time. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained, with uncomfortable clarity, exactly how 31 years had led to this single, catastrophic phone call. Patricia filed the civil suit on Emily's behalf 3 weeks after the demand letter deadline passed unmet. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle full of shouted objections, real financial disputes rarely are. It was paperwork, mediation sessions, and a mountain of bank statements that told a story more damning than any speech could. During mediation, faced with the concrete, undeniable evidence of the transfers and the very real possibility of a criminal referral for financial exploitation of a related adult, Diane's bravado finally cracked. Her own attorney, a tired-looking man who seemed to already regret taking the case, advised her that fighting this in court would be both expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful, given that Emily had never authorized the specific transfers, had reported them within days, and had a paper trail of the bank's own fraud investigation backing her claim. Diane agreed to a repayment plan, the full $42,000, repaid over 18 months, secured against her house. It wasn't instant justice. It wasn't the dramatic, satisfying reversal Emily had fantasized about during the darkest nights of that summer. But it was real, and it was hers, clawed back one legal step at a time. Tyler, faced with his own separate demand for the portion of the money that had gone directly to pay off his debts, took much longer to respond. Eventually, he agreed to a smaller monthly repayment as well, a humiliating, grinding process that Emily suspected would take him years, if he ever finished at all. She stopped checking in on his progress. That wasn't her responsibility anymore. Jason had been quietly steady through the entire ordeal, never once suggesting Emily let it go, never once making her feel like she was overreacting, never once treating the missing money as a minor inconvenience. When she finally told him the vineyard deposit was recoverable, that they could move forward with October after all, he hugged her so tightly she could feel him shaking. "I wasn't worried about the wedding," he told her. "I was worried about you. I watched you disappear into yourself for weeks. I didn't care if we got married in a parking lot. I just wanted you to come back." That was the moment Emily realized something important. Somewhere in the chaos of protecting her money, she had also been protecting herself, relearning, piece by piece, that she was allowed to have boundaries, allowed to say no, allowed to choose herself over a family that had spent her whole life assuming she always would choose them. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself doing small, deliberate things she never would have considered before that summer. She opened a new checking account at a different bank entirely, one with no history, no old authorized users, no lingering permissions from a childhood she'd long outgrown. She set up alerts for every transaction over $100. She spoke to Jason, plainly and without embarrassment, about combining finances only in ways that required both their signatures, not because she distrusted him, but because she never again wanted to discover a missing fortune through a banking app on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She also started saying no to things that had nothing to do with money. She stopped attending every single family function out of obligation. She stopped answering Diane's calls within the first ring, the way she'd trained herself to do since childhood, as if her mother's need for immediate attention outranked whatever Emily happened to be doing. She let herself be, for the first time in years, simply unavailable sometimes, and the world did not end. The wedding happened in October, exactly as planned, at the small vineyard 2 hours outside Denver. The leaves had turned a deep, burnished gold, and string lights hung between the trees like something out of a dream Emily had once been afraid to have. Diane was not there. Emily had sent no invitation and felt, for the first time in her life, entirely at peace with that decision. Tyler had asked, hesitantly, if he could come. Emily had said no, not out of cruelty, but because some bridges, once burned all the way down, simply weren't meant to be rebuilt on the same day someone was trying to build a new life. Aunt Linda came, quiet and a little sheepish, and hugged Emily longer than necessary at the reception. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. "I'm sorry I didn't." Emily accepted the apology, because holding on to every grudge from that summer would have cost her more than it was worth. But she noticed, too, how much lighter she felt letting some relationships simply fade rather than forcing them back into a shape that no longer fit. A year after the wedding, Emily sat on the porch of the house she and Jason had bought together, modest, but paid for honestly, down to the last nail, sorting through the mail. Among the bills and catalogs was an envelope from Diane. Inside was a check, the second-to-last installment of the repayment plan, and a short note. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the payments will be finished by spring, and that I think about what I did more than you probably believe I do." Emily read the note twice, folded it, and set it aside. She didn't write back. Not out of spite, simply because she had nothing left to prove, to her mother or to herself. The money would be fully repaid soon. The wedding had happened without a single dollar of it being stolen twice. And the woman who had once believed family meant absorbing every cost without complaint had built, quietly and deliberately, a life where love came with boundaries and boundaries were not betrayals. She had not gotten revenge in the way the old, wounded part of her had once imagined. No dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation, no tearful apology delivered exactly the way she'd scripted it in her head during sleepless nights. What she'd gotten instead was something steadier and, in the end, far more satisfying. Her money back, her name cleared, her spine intact, and a wedding day that belonged to no one but her and the man who had never once tried to talk her out of standing up for herself. Sometimes, she thought, closing the mailbox and heading back inside to where Jason was waiting with dinner half made and music playing low in the kitchen, the best revenge wasn't loud at all. It was simply this: living well on your own terms, with the people who never once made you doubt you deserved to.